You know what they say on TV. Push one of Epi's stat.
Yeah, nobody actually says that.
Exactly. Welcome to the real world of nursing. I'm Millicent Olulade, better known as Nurse Millie.
And I'm Nurse Tara.
And we're surviving 12-hour shifts, nonstop call lights, and pure hospital chaos.
And each other.
This is Shift Happens, where we talk about what really happens on and off the shift. Welcome back to the Shift Happens podcast. You have now clocked in and you are ready to go to work, honey. Clock in. Before we get started on this juiciness you're about to hear, you might need a bed wipe for that. Why don't you go ahead and subscribe, like, and comment on our social media platforms, which are Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, Apple Podcast at Shift Happens Pod Show.
Yes.
Now, there are some phone calls that you forget 5 minutes later. And then there are other phone calls that you're like, hey, I'm going to remember this for the rest of my life.
Yeah, some of those phone calls brought excitement, some brought heartbreak, some changed everything.
And today we are going to talk about the phone calls that we'll never forget. So what's the chief complaint today?
Why do certain phone calls stay with us forever? And how do those moments shape who we become?
So the shift report, so this is what I'm handing off to you as my fellow nurse. Most people can remember exactly where they were when they received a life-changing phone call. So why do some of these phone calls stick with us? I will go first if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Okay, great. So what inspired me to become a healthcare provider, a nurse, or even a nurse versus a physician is because fortunately, my grandparents were blessed enough to live into their early 90s. And so unfortunately, when you do have family members or patients that live that long, there are a lot of comorbidities, right? And so towards the end of life, we see a lot of the downfalls, the declines. And when you're not in healthcare, at least growing up for me, I witnessed these things and I wanted to know more about it. So I would get a phone call like, hey, you need to come stop by and make your final rounds and say goodbye. And it's like, well, what does that mean? And I know sometimes when we've had those conversations with patients and their loved ones, and you talk about end of life, hospice, withdrawing care, those can be very difficult information to process.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of emotions to kind of sift through. And sometimes you feel like even when you're getting the explanation from a healthcare provider in layman's terms or in medical terms, it still doesn't register to you.
Yeah, because it's such an emotional time.
It's such an emotional time. And so what made me even want to get my master's is because I wanted to have a specialty, which is primary care, but I wanted to focus more on the gerontology side, which is geriatrics, taking care of elderly patients, because that was such a fragile and somewhat traumatic time in my life. And I remember vividly the hospice nurses calling me or my family and me going to the family member's house and them just sitting down, explaining everything to me. And it was so gentle. It was so loving. It was so thorough. It was just, it's an art. And I said, you know what? I want to do that one day. And so that's how I decided to get into my specialty. So those were phone calls that really shaped me and where I wanted to be in healthcare, because I did want to do medicine, as I've mentioned before. And then just watching nurses at the bedside, that really stuck to my heart more so than having to stay and no, I'm not minimizing anybody's position, but rather than a physician coming in and saying hello, giving you the patient treatments plan. So I was like, I want to be by the bedside 12 hours a day.
Do you remember where you were?
Yeah, I remember being at home. I remember when my grandfather had a stroke and we got the call and I was in nursing school and I had to go over there and kind of diagnose and assess. And I'm like, hey, I think this is what's going on, because my grandfather was admitted initially and they said, oh, he's 90 years old. So he's just having altered mental status. So they said they discharged him. And so, my uncle was like, hey, I still don't know if that's right. He's just looking worse. So I said, well, we're going to come over there and assess. And so drooping face, slurred speech, confusion, vomiting, and all the things. So we immediately called IMSA again, and they were like, why did they discharge him? This is ridiculous. So we sent him back to another hospital, but by then it was too late because he missed the TPA window.
Yeah, because it's only 90 minutes.
Yeah. And he had those everlasting effects of the stroke.
Have phone calls become less meaningful in the texting era?
I feel like it depends on the context. I think that this generation is focused more on texting, but I feel like in healthcare, we still make those phone calls.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's also how it's said. Sometimes you're so used to giving people bad news that maybe you take out the organic part of just being relatable, like having a relatable moment or saying, hey, this could be my mom, this could be my grandparent or whatnot. And so it does get mundane. And then sometimes there's like, I remember right after my grandfather passed, I had a patient that looked just like him. And it affected me. And I said, hey, you know what? And so that was, my moment where I said, yeah, this affects me. What about you? What is the phone call that you got, good or bad, that impacted your life?
I think a good phone call is when I got a call that I was in anesthesia school to start as a CRNA.
Where were you when you got that phone call?
I was at work, and everyone thought something was wrong because I was still pregnant. And they're like, "What's wrong?" Because everyone is so all over me because I was pregnant and so particular about my care. And I said, I just got into CRNA school. And it was a good feeling because I was waitlisted initially to start next year. And I thought maybe that was good because I just had the baby. And then they're like, no, we want you now. Pay the money. And I did. And I was glad to go start school in 2008.
Wow. Okay.
Are good news calls or bad news calls more memorable?
I think they're equally both. Trying to think of a good news call I've had. Honey, I guess when my child was in the NICU and she was born preterm. And so she had the respiratory concerns. And so every time she would like have a pause in her respirations, they would say that's another 5 days she has to stay in the NICU. So we went like 2 days and she was good. And then it was like 4 days and we were approaching the 5th day she could go home, and then she had another pause. And I was like, oh my gosh, because this was my first child. It was during COVID. And then I also, I can only relate to people that have had a child that died during labor, like a stillbirth, because you go home and you don't have your child with you and you still have the symptoms of like postpartum, the hormones are changing your body. You feel that baby's not in there. You're wanting to nurse, like your breasts are becoming engorged and that sort of thing. And I just couldn't be with my baby. Yeah. And I felt like I was like neglecting her because she's like, I'm sleeping in my bed and she's in the NICU. So as soon as they would open and allow visitors, I was in there. And they'd almost have to say, hey, she's going to be home soon. So you also have to take this time to care for yourself because when they come home, it's a whole nother level.
So was that a good call? Or?
It was a good call. So the fifth day she did it, I was like, oh God. And they're like, you know what? She's stable. We're going to let her come home. However, you got to do this, because y'all are healthcare providers, you're going to have an oxygen tank. You're going to have to monitor her. You're going to have to check. We're like, fine, we just want to take her. And so I was so happy to like take my baby home. And I was so stressed out, honey, because I said these monitors, they were going off and they were artifact. So I'm like, So it was good and bad. But for me, it was good because I could finally be with my baby.
Yeah, that's a good call.
That's a good call. Now, in hindsight, honey, I wish I had taken that advice and laid down and took a couple naps, because once they come home, it is no napping.
So you're going to talk about your bad call?
I'll talk about my bad call. So another incident I had that inspired me to do healthcare was, I remember I was sick. I had just turned 16 that Friday. I saw my brother that Saturday. He came over to have birthday breakfast with us. And at the time, my mother was managing an apartment complex that my grandfather owned. And my brother was communicating with my mom about what he needed to get his lease started. So that Sunday night he called and he's like, let me talk to mom. I said no, and I hung up on him because that was the relationship we had. And so he called back and was like, let me talk to mom. I was like, okay. So I heard her on the phone. She's like, hey, yeah, bring your driver's license, your birth certificate, all the social security card. You're going to do da-da-da-da. Okay, boom. So that was about 7:00 at night. And then 4:00 in the morning, and my heart is racing. We get a phone call. It's actually not a phone call. It was a doorbell ring. And I was like, what is that? And these 2 detectives come to the door, and I can overhear things happening, but I'm asleep because I have school the next day or in a few hours. And I just hear this blood curdling scream from my mom. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what is going on? But I'm half asleep. So I go downstairs and they've left. And my mom is just on the floor, and I pick her up and I'm like, what happened? And she's like, your brother's dead. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, he's dead. And I couldn't process that because it was like, we just talked to him. What's going on? What happened? How did it happen? Where did it happen? And I'm just trying to be present with my mom because she's obviously breaking down, and then process what I've been told. And then I guess at some point my mom maybe called my dad, and then he called. My parents are divorced. So he called and he said, Millicent, what's going on? And I think your mom called me. And I said, Gavin's dead. And I just heard the phone drop. And he gets back on the phone. He's like, what are you saying to me? And I was like, I don't know what else to say except that. And so that was a phone call that changed my life because I had to tell my dad that. And we also didn't have, any information.
Yeah.
And so that moment inspired me to do healthcare because I realized how fragile life is. And it takes somebody that, not necessarily, but it takes somebody to almost be able to relate to what you've been through, like with a loss or whatever the case may be. Like, example, some people may not understand what it's like to have 4 kids. You've had 1 kid and you're like, hey, why can't you just come out because I have 4?
Yeah.
Or you have 2. And it's not to compare my milestones with yours or my mountains to yours, but it's just what I'm dealing with and how I'm dealing with it.
We're all drowning.
We're all drowning. What are you drowning from?
Yeah.
And so for me, death is something that's just very near and dear to me, and I'm still afraid of it. And for context, what we discussed earlier was that, hey, Millie, you don't want help, because I'm so overprotective about my children because I lost my brother when he was 18 years old. And for me, I just don't want anything to happen to my kids. So I just have that natural, innate anxiety. And that's why I got therapy, because I'm like, I can't project this on my kids. And so it's just something I work through every day because I always think the worst.
Just being overly protective.
Overly protective, and always, some people call it pessimistic, but I just call it being realistic for me because my perception about death or something bad happening is different. So to me, I always just expect the worst until something good happens.
Yeah, I've had a bad call as well about death. So we all worked in the ICU. You have to work in the ICU before you can start anesthesia school. So I worked in the thoracic ICU, recovering hearts. And I did this before I got into school. And I worked with this gentleman. His name was Todd Dupler. And we were really, really close. And we all went to anesthesia school together. Yeah.
At the same time, in the same place?
Well, about the same time.
Okay.
I think I was a year ahead of him.
Okay.
And we all were like, we're going to have our own practice and we're going to have our own business. I have my own business. I'm the only employee though. But he actually had a group when we all graduated, and it was where he had other CRNAs and he would get the jobs. So we started out working for companies, and I was like, come on, let's go get this job. So we would work in Atoka or Stigler, Oklahoma. And I'm like, come on, let's do it. And he's like, where do I go? I go, you go here, you go to Atoka tomorrow. And so I kind of got the title of his work wife. And even his wife would say, oh, you're his work wife. And we would laugh, and we were all really great friends.
Yeah.
So November 11, 2020, he was running in the neighborhood with his son, and he was hit by a drunk driver and hit and killed. And I was working in Tulsa, and I remember I just started my shift, and they called me, my friend Chris, and he wouldn't tell me what was going on. He's like, hey, Todd's been hurt. You need to come home or come to their house. I was like, well, what's going on? And I was like, I have to go. It was at night because I was working night shift. So that was the longest drive. I had to drive to the city. And I was calling my mom to pray for him. I called my one really good friend. I called my best friend, Cindy, my friend, Shauna. And then Robin called me, my good friend from work. He was Todd's best friend. Yeah. And he's like, he's dead. Oh, and I was like, what do you mean? I go, no, he's just hurt really badly. Because they didn't want to tell me. Right. Because they, for one, knew how close we were. Yeah. And that really just changed my life because he was such an important figure at work and just in my life. I always wanted to call him, and even his wife would be like, you need to call him. I will call him and cuss him out, just try to straighten him out because he was always doing something. But it's like getting those phone calls about death just really changes you because it's just so forever.
It's so final.
Yeah, it's so forever. You can never. And this may be like with you, not being able to tell someone goodbye and they were snatched
from you.
Yeah. I feel like that's so hard. Like, whereas my grandpa, he died, he was like your grandparents. Yeah. He was older. I think he was 101. Yeah. It. My uncle, I got to tell them goodbye and see them and hug them and say goodbye. Even my aunt that died in California, I got to talk to her and tell her goodbye. But when you don't get to say goodbye to someone and then you get that phone call, it can be so traumatizing because they are just taken away and you can never be with that person again.
You have to make your own closure if you're strong enough to do that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know Todd as well as you did, but we would work together and I really got to know him like my last year working there. And he was just so laid back and chill. He was a pleasure to work with. He's easygoing. And I'm not sure exactly how, I don't know if you told me, I don't remember how I found out, but I was just devastated because it's just like a shock. Like you just saw that person, you just talked to that person. And then, I start thinking about his friends and his family and his kids, and it's just like, ugh.
Yeah, very devastating. Yeah. But like what you said, life is so precious and so short.
And fleeting.
Yes.
Yeah. And it makes you almost kind of, it makes you have, like with him dying like that, it drudged up a lot of the grief that I had about my own experiences. But it also was a reminder to say that live every moment as though it was your last. And for outside of personal experiences, I've had 2 patients that were very near and dear to me. One was like my first patient that I had during nursing school. So because I kept working in the ICU, I just loved it. I would see this lady like every day for weeks. And I would just ask, can I do the ICU rotation instead of the ER? I know I want to do this. And I was attached to her and she gradually went downhill, but at that time I didn't understand the process of death and your body shutting down. So one day I came to work after like my 6th week there and I was like, oh, where's Miss So-and-so? Did y'all move her to another floor? Let me go find her. They're like, she died. And that was like my first experience outside of my family member. Even my grandparents were alive then. I just had the death of my brother. But I just sat there and I cried and I'm like, and I was like, you know what, this is what healthcare is. There's going to be good days where people transition to the floor and then they get discharged. And then there are the days that the patient declines unexpectedly. And then it's just like, and then you see the family grieving. And like, again, it drudges up your own personal experiences.
Yeah, with death.
Yeah. And then my last one that I had was a patient I had in nurse practitioner school. And I was at this facility for about 4 weeks. And this was like a rehab facility and she had fallen. And I just kind of came in and introduced myself as a student. And I wanted to know, hey, what brings you in, and do my workup and all of the things. And so she said, I fell. And it was just so weird because it's like my body gave out. And she's like, and I had all these tests done. And then I find out I have ALS. And she's like, so she has a broken hip. She's had hip surgery. She's still got the pins in her legs and everything. And so I watched her gradually get better. But then when I started to look up ALS and how quickly it evolves, I started to see that in her. And then it was like every other day she would just get worse. And I think her children are out of town. And so she would have a neighbor come by and visit. But I would just my preceptor was like, you can sit in there as long as you want with her because you've seen all your other patients. And I can just spend the last hour with her. And I would do that every day. And then one day she was intubated and she wasn't as responsive. And then a couple of days she just died. And I was just so, so heartbroken. And because we would hold hands and I was like, I'm engaged. And she would ask me about like, who's this guy you're marrying? What do you want in your future? And this lady was like in her 50s. And she's like, I have all these things. It was just so unexpected. And then years later, my aunt is diagnosed with ALS. So I was trying to prepare my family about this disease because I'd seen it. And so
how it progressed.
Yeah. Cool that you'd like to share other than, you getting in CRNA school or the passing of your dear friend and colleague?
Just about career, just getting these jobs. I work 5 jobs, man. How many jobs you have, you lazy ting? And just getting those phone calls about being accepted. That's always a nice phone call just to add to my repertoire.
Yes. Honey, and passing the boards.
It's
not a phone call, but it's a email.
It's a great communication.
I just feel like passing a board to me is like, oh my gosh. Mm-hmm. Because you always go in really not knowing how you're going to do. And then if you're going to have to retake it, and then everybody at work knows you're in school and they're like, did you pass? Did you find out? Did you take your test yet? And it's like, I can't imagine going and be like, nodding. Oh, it's okay, baby, next time. Then you have the pressure of saying, oh, I have one more time to pass. I got to pass.
Right. I passed both my boards.
Me too, the first time.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. Thank goodness, honey.
Thank God.
Thank God, because I can't deal with it. So the first audience question, and also we would like for you guys to comment and let us know your thoughts and answers to these questions. What's a phone call you'll never forget and why? So we've shared ours. So what are your good and bad phone calls that you've received and how did they impact you? Have you ever received a call that completely changed your life? Again, good or bad, and why did that change your life? And do you answer unknown numbers? Can we talk about that?
Mm-hmm. Especially if it's private, because I'm ready for the smoke.
Okay, let me go first and then I'll let you go because I feel like it's going to get hot and spicy in here. So let me keep my head cocked to the side and be ready. I don't answer unknown calls because I feel like in the last few years, the spam calls have gotten a little outrageous. They've gotten a little outrageous. And so I just have that little block filter thing on my phone, like the spam call filter I put on there. But I typically do not answer unknown calls. If you leave me a voicemail and I listen to it, great. But otherwise, you're not going to consolidate my student loans that have been paid off. Amen. Thank you, Jesus, for the last 20 years. Or tell me my PayPal's been hacked. Sometimes I do answer, though, and I have an accent. And I'm like, oh, my God, did you do it? And I'll waste their time. And they'll be so mad at me, like if I'm bored and I have time. But anyway, so yeah, what smoke are you talking about?
Oh, like if it's I don't know. Who's calling private? Why are you calling me private? I don't know. Let's say it's someone calling and they want to know about my boyfriend.
So do you answer? Do you know those are unknown or do you answer?
They might be private. Okay, and I feel like someone calling private, they want to have a problem and I want to give it to them. So I'll answer those. And I just answer every call. You never know when someone's in trouble. Yeah. I love Cindy. She's my friend. She answers every call. I was stranded somewhere with my dad. I had to use someone's phone call. I'm like, who's going to answer? Mm-hmm. Somebody white. Because Black folks, y'all are not answering unknown phone calls. No. You're not. And I knew she would. Mm-hmm. So I called. She answered. I was calling everybody. You know, that Cat Williams said that thing. That's why I said that when he was like, you call a white person wrong. And they're like, hello? Mm-hmm. Does Bill live here? I was like, no. Yeah, call me back and let's work it out. So that kind of reminds me of that. That's why I said, Black people, they will not answer a call they don't know. I knew she would answer and I was so thankful. So I'm going to keep the spirit going. Yeah. I'm going to answer the unknown and private calls because it may be important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely bad about that. My cousin will call me. At the most, my cousin is so spontaneous and random. He'll call me at like 2 a.m, 10 a.m. He's usually at a bar. He's had a drink. He's like, girl, I ran into this boy that knew you in high school. Do you know him? I'm like, bro, it's 2 a.m. So from now on, when he calls me, I don't answer because I'm like, oh God. And then he'll leave these voicemail. Really? You just not going to answer? I could be dead or something. And by the time you call me back, I'm dead. I'm like, that's true, but what could I do? You're in
Well,
Houston.
I'm not going to answer after a certain time because I cut my ringer off. But from 6:30 to 8, I will answer all calls.
I'm not going to answer. Unless it's my kid's school or something. I just am not going to answer. So what, where were you? I'm sorry.
Diagnoses.
Yes.
Diagnosis.
What's your diagnosis for this topic?
Certain moments become permanent memories.
Mm-hmm.
Life can change in a single phone call.
Agreed.
Good news and bad news both shape us. We talked about that. I think they're equal. I feel like good news and bad news, they just shape you. So
you remember
that's true.
where you are when you get both phone calls.
Yeah,
at least
I don't feel like one is worse than the other. Some calls create opportunities. Like, call me, let me get that check.
Yeah.
Some calls change our perspective forever.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that was a lot of yours, like really why you geared toward being a nurse.
Yeah. Also, if you guys don't know, I think Tara tried to blast me a couple conversations ago. I was really wanting to do reality TV for a minute and kind of now. At the age of 40. So when I was like 18, like I was like, oh my gosh, I want to do this. So I auditioned for The Real World, honey. I auditioned for Bad Girls Club. I did Top Model. I tried to go on Oprah Winfrey and make up some weird illness I had so she would get me on there. They never called me back. Girl, I was trying to do, Tyra had a talk show too. So I was like, maybe if I get on her talk show, she'll see how amazing I am. Then she's like, girl, you want to get on Top Model? Do you want to be on Top? I wanted to be, honey. I showed up to the auditions in a white tank and jeans with a bare face. Like,
what happened? You weren't chosen.
I didn't even. But the thing was, with Bad Girls Club, they called me back and they called me back and they called me back and they called me back. So I was like, I'm really that girl.
So why didn't you do it?
So then they said, okay, we're going to do one more rounds of auditions. So can you hang out and we're going to see, we're going to this big city, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, okay, well then I get what? A call that I got accepted into nursing school. And when you get that call, you got to let them know within like a week else your spot is given up.
Yeah.
So I'm like, do I want to be a nurse or a baddie? Like, I have real life decisions to make. And my mom said, well, you've got to make a decision. And you know you can't be on TVs fighting girls, throwing drink. I can. She was like, well, think about it. If you get on Bad Girls Club and you have your 15 minutes of fame, you can never go in healthcare. You will always be known as that girl hitting people.
Right.
I was not trying to go. This was like season 3, 5-ish. On Bad Girls Club when it was like changing your life. I was not going to be a bad girl. I was going to be like the instigator type of girl, like the Valerie. I was like, oh my, like innocent and like, oh my God, but start drama, blah, 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 boom.
Well, I'm glad you chose nursing when you got the phone call. Millie, let me tell you my treatment plan.
Okay, give me a treat. Don't. No more reality TV. Got it.
What is your treatment plan?
My treatment plan is don't wait for life-changing phone calls to tell people how you feel because you never know when it's going to be your last moment.
How you feel or if you're angry with someone.
Why do you say that?
Because what if I was mad at Todd?
Yeah.
Or what if you were mad at your brother?
Yeah.
And if you have a argument with someone and then that's just how you feel. So they remember that you had an argument and you feel so guilty, I feel like.
So like I said, my brother and I had a love-hate relationship because we were 2 years apart and he's older, I'm younger, I'm the baby sister. So when I found out he passed, we were like fighting each other the day before. And I remember at his funeral a week later, I still had bruises on me from when he had pinched me. And I had said when I gave like my little goodbye poem or whatever that I keep feeling that bruise to just remind me that there's still a part of him here. But also for me, my closure was knowing my brother knew we had a love-hate relationship. And so sometimes the person knows you. And so you can't hold on to the shoulda, coulda, wouldas.
Yeah.
And like if you had a falling out with Todd or your grandparents or whatever, Todd knows your heart.
Yeah.
But I get it. Some people just...
Oh, that's a good thing
you know what I mean?
Say, yeah.
And it's like, you can also not blame yourself for being yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you don't want to take for granted that you'll have the opportunity to make up with that person. But also, if that person knows you and knows your heart, then it's just it's a typical day, whether it's toxic or not. It's just a typical day. And yes, you wish it could have ended differently, but what is the tradition of your relationship? For my brother and I, it was banter, it was physical altercations, it was name calling. And that's how he would remember me and I would remember him.
Yeah.
I do think about at the age of 40, like, how would our relationship be now? It would be completely different, right?
Yeah, because you're grown up.
Mm-hmm.
Also, my treatment plan, when life changes unexpectedly, give yourself permission to adapt rather than panic.
So let's talk about discharge instructions. So we are going to also address those chief complaints. So one phone call can change your day, your year, or even your entire life, but never underestimate the power of that single moment. So sometimes you do have to live in the moment, create your own closure. And, also, what am I trying to say? I think just living in the moment, whether it's good or bad. Like, I remember when I passed my nurse practitioner boards, I didn't even live in the moment because I was so stressed out about the exam. And then I also was wedding planning. So it was almost like a checklist, like, okay, that's done, now back to this wedding. And it's like, I didn't even care to go to my graduation because I was like, I'm already on to the next thing. So sometimes you just have to live in that moment and sort out your feelings, whether it's good or bad.
Yeah.
Just my opinion.
The calls we remember most aren't always the ones we expected. They're the ones that changed us.
So what is our medical term of the week? Prognosis.
A prediction about the likely outcome of a condition or situation.
So basically an educated guess about what happens next. So for instance, we may have used the word prognosis when I talk about my patient or my aunt that had ALS. So the prognosis is what you think is going to happen based off of their diagnosis and their outcome.
Right. That's good.
Yeah.
I like what you said.
You like that? Okay, good. I'm glad you approve.
Well, my approval does matter.
Your approval matters, at least in this moment. So thank you guys for tuning in to the Shift Happens podcast. Again, leave your comments below. We'd like to hear your feedback and your thoughts on the episode, or if you have anything to share that is relevant.
From you AMers.
All right, that's our time. The charge nurse is already looking for us. Thanks for working with us.
And if you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
And follow us at Shift Happens on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, so you don't miss the chaos. I'm Nurse Millie.
And I'm Nurse Tara.
Please don't hit the call button. We are clocked out.